Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Saturday, December the 13th, and welcome to our commentary. Before we get to Dick Van Dyke, that's going to be our primary topic today. Let me just touch on a couple of things. I have a post over at the American Thinker Saturday morning talking about these Senate hearing or House hearings. In my opinion, they've turned into a circus. What you basically have is, these senators, especially the members of Congress, just giving 5 minute speeches. And they don't really get to any material. They just sit there and for 5 minutes, they just read a speech. And they go after the guest. In this case, the guest was Secretary Nome, Secretary of Health or not Health, but Homeland Security, who was there talking about, obviously the deportation and immigration policy. And look, like with anything, there are always legitimate questions you can ask. I mean, nothing is perfect. But that's not what happens in these hearings. They get into little campaign speeches and they're all beating up. And then when the guest wants to answer back, then they say, well, I reserved my time. So basically it turns into a 5 minute speech that we watch later on X or in a campaign commercial. And it really takes away, in my opinion, from the purpose of these hearings, I mean, which is to get information. So I make a couple of recommendations in my post today. As a number one, they should limit the number of members who participate. Instead of having everybody give a 5 minute speech, which is what it ends up being, they should just maybe select five from each side and say, okay, these are my five members. These are my five members. And then instead of having 5 minute speeches, they can actually have a conversation with the guest. Ask the guest some good questions and let's have back and forth. And let's actually get some information that we don't really get in these in these hearings that, as I say, just become political. So one recommendation is five on each side and then limit it to that and then have more time for the guests to talk. And then, of course, the other thing that I recommended is take away the TV cameras and just do it on print media. Now, that's probably unconstitutional, never going to happen, I know. But you don't come across, whatever clownish things you do, don't come across as dramatic and clownish as on print as they do on TV. I mean, I think the TV camera, in a lot of ways, has turned these hearings into what they are. So I think we need to do something about these hearings because we're not really getting information. We're just getting campaign speeches. And if a Republican is in the White House, then the Democrats are all over the guest and vice versa. I mean, let's be honest. And one of the problems that many of these Democrats have right now is that the biggest fear, if you're a Democrat, your biggest fear right now is the primary, because most of these Democrats are going to run in safe districts. Most of the ones that were talking yesterday, they're going to be in safe districts. So the biggest fear that they have is a primary. Primary is the biggest fear that a Democrat has these days. Not the GOP opponent, because they're going to beat that, but it's the primary, and the primary is what's driving a lot of these Democrats into further, in a sense, further and further to the left and further into the anti-Trump territory that they all want to be in, because when somebody challenges them, they can say, look, I hate Trump as much as you do. And here's evidence of it. Listen to me or watch me at these hearings. So they become kind of a waste of time, really, these hearings. And that's why I think we need a change in the format. Well, just very quickly, there's a new poll, I guess the first real poll that came out. And Miss Crockett is leading Mr. Talarico by about 10 points, 51 something. We don't know if that's the first, we don't know because it's too early in the game. But that poll could either be name recognition. I think a lot of Democrats are hoping that. Or it could also be that Miss Crockett connects with the base of the party. The base of the party is a lot more radical than I think a lot of Democrats understand. So I don't know. I don't know what it tells us, but what it tells us is that she starts on top and with a pretty decent lead. Well, let's talk about our primary subject today, Dick Van Dyke. Look, when anybody turns 100, that's pretty incredible. Dick Van Dyke is 100 years old today. And when anybody turns 100, I mean, that's a rare thing. It's becoming probably more common now than it used to be. I mean, it used to be 80 was pretty old, 85, 90. But now, we hear more and more people reaching 100. A lot of it is our medical knowledge, and a lot of it is just good genes or sometimes good luck or whatever. But Dick Van Dyke turns 100 today. And I have some real memories of Dick Van Dyke, and some of them are personal. Now, I don't know him personally. I don't mean it that way. But when we first came to the United States back in 1964, we came here at a time when I thought a lot of the television shows were the best. Whether it was Dick Van Dyke, whether it was Batman, I remember that, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Get Smart, Petticoat Junction was another one they had on. It just seems like Mission Impossible was another one, Secret Agent Man. There was just a bunch of great shows on TV. Every night you had 3 networks giving you some really good quality shows. And the Dick Van Dyke Show was one of them. Now, the actual show, I think it began in 62 and ran into 66 or something like that. So it wasn't on the air as long as some of the others. But for us, it was a lot of fun watching that show. And I remember many nights in Wisconsin, we were sitting there with my mom. My dad was working a lot of nights because he had a second job at a hotel. And many times we'd be watching TV with my mother, and we would try to explain to my mother what was going on because her English was not good. And one of the funny things about Dick Van Dyke was that the humor was excellent. The stories were great too. I mean, the show was fabulous, and the characters were just the best. You had Dick Van Dyke, Rob Petrie, who was the writer. I think he was the head writer in a television show. That was the plot. His wife, Laura, played by Mary Tyler Moore, a beautiful, beautiful woman. And then you had a couple of other characters on the show, Buddy and Sally, who were the 2 guys who worked with Rob. They were the writers of the show. And then I think there was a guy named Mel who was the manager, or maybe that was the name of the show. I don't remember, but there was a manager, a guy with glasses, who was really funny, really kind of a funny guy. He didn't seem to enjoy the humor that much, but he was a really funny guy. But the show meant a lot to us because one of the things that happened, you come to a new country and you want to learn the language. And one of the best ways to learn the language is to watch TV. So we used to watch a lot of TV during the week. Now, in Wisconsin, there were many weekdays when it was pretty cold outside and there was a lot of snow. And for a while there, we didn't have a car anyway, so we really didn't have a lot of places to go. So we used to watch these TV shows for entertainment and also because it gave us, as I said, the opportunity to practice English. So we would sit there in the living room and watch these shows. And my mother would try to keep up with the show. And she had a very difficult time keeping up with the show. And the one thing that she had most difficulty with are the punchlines. These jokes always have a punchline. And she couldn't quite get the punchline. So we would try to translate for her, but it's not easy translating a punchline. So we had to give her like a larger context of what the joke was. Eventually she would get it. And sometimes I think the body language of the acting would give away what they were saying. But there were times when we simply could not translate the punchline. So we're sitting there saying, well, this is what he said, and this is what he meant. And she would then kind of figure it out because of the storyline that of the show. But the Dick Van Dyke Show was one of those shows where we had the most difficulty with the punchlines. Now, my brother, my sister, and I, we would laugh at the punchline because we got it. But it was very difficult to translate it to my mother, to go from a punchline in English to the Spanish translation. So it was a lot of fun in many ways to do it. I mean, we would always kind of look at each other and say, well, how do we explain this? How do we say this one? Anyway, it was just an absolutely remarkable memory that we have. And of course, Dick Van Dyke was right in the middle of it. Later, excuse me, when excuse me, when Dick Van Dyke made that movie Mary Poppins, I remember taking my sister to watch that movie. And there I was with a bunch of little girls from school watching this movie. I was kind of like, the brother who was entrusted by my parents to take my little sister to the movies. So we went to see Mary Poppins, also The Sound of Music later, but that was obviously a different movie. But it was so much fun. Dick Van Dyke was so much fun. I think he also made a couple of other Disney movies that were really good. And here he is, 100 years old. And somebody, excuse me, somebody was pointing out something very interesting today on X, on Twitter, what they now call X, used to be called Twitter. Somebody was pointing out that Dick Van Dyke was born in 1925. He was born 99 years after the passing of Thomas Jefferson. So think about that. He's closer to the passing of Thomas Jefferson in 1826 than he is to his 100th birthday. I mean, it's pretty incredible if you like a little bit of historical trivia. That's kind of interesting that he was born 99 years after Thomas Jefferson passed away. And here he is, still going at age 100. And from everything we know, everything that has been written about him, he's still pretty active at age 100. And that's great. I'm delighted that he's living a very active life. I hope that I make it to 100 and I have his energy and his level of activity, because he is really a human specimen. I don't know how else to say it, but when you make it to 100 and you look as good as he does and you keep the lifestyle that he does, listen, that's worth celebrating. So happy number 100 to Dick Van Dyke. Absolutely amazing character, very funny man, to say the least, and somebody who I remember a great deal. Those Dick Van Dyke shows and those episodes were so memorable when we first came to the United States. Every time I see a rerun now, I can relate to it, and it almost brings me back a memory of, because I've seen them all. I think, pretty sure I've seen them all. So every time I watch one of them, it kind of reminds me of, oh yeah, I remember explaining that to my mom many years ago or whatever. So it brings not only a memory of our early years in the United States, but it also brings me a memory of my mom, who passed away about 4.5 years ago. So anyway, Dick Van Dyke made it to 100. He's still going, and I hope I can do a video about him next year when he turns 101. Thank you for listening, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll probably chat with our friend George Rodriguez Sunday night. We'll talk a little bit about Texas and what's going on here. Have a good weekend, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.